Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today for the first time on the Last American Vagabond is, if I'm going to say it correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Etienne de la Boetie squared. And we can get into what that name means and the information around the background there. And we're going to be discussing today the Liberty on the Rocks event at Sedona, which I'm honored to be a part of. And we're going to get into kind of the broader conversation around voluntarism or just, libertarianism, or in my mind, more anarchism, agorism, the idea of like voluntary exchange between people, and a great conversation I just had with Larkin Rose, which is still fresh on my mind, the idea of the illusion of authority, the illusion of government, the illusion of voting, and why all these things are very important. And what I want to get into is why, interestingly, more people today than ever seem to be interested in this, aware of this, asking questions about this. So it's a perfect time for the upcoming event. So thanks for being on the show. It's good to see you, brother.
Hey, good to see you. Good to be with your audience.
Absolutely. And I did I say the name correctly? I believe I did.
Etienne de la Boetie.
Okay, so I said it wrong.
Boetie or Boetie? I've heard people say it both ways. So,
or bow tie, say it incorrectly.
I get that a lot too.
Yeah, I'm sure. But so why don't you go ahead and start with that, since that's something that's got an interesting history around it, and the reason you chose that name.
Sure, it's obviously a nom de plume, a pen name, or a nom de guerre, a war name. And the original Etienne de la Boetie was a French political philosopher. He wrote in the 16th century, and he was really one of the first to really kind of break down the tricks and the techniques that rulers used, not just to get obedience, but to get fealty and adoration and God save the Queen and all hail the chief, and to get people to go along with something that isn't really in their interest. And with my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed, I'm really doing his work in the modern age. And the book kind of breaks down like a playbook of how do you trick populations into going along with government, even though to this day it's not in their interest.
Yeah. And by the way, I really appreciate in your book in general that, kind of a lot of the content we're discussing, he's covering in his book, comes along with a data backup of like the verification information, which I have saved in a special place. So I think that's a fantastic thing to include. So let's start today with a general update on what's going to be happening at the conference, so people catch that right in the beginning, and then let's get into kind of like what we're talking about, what the conference is about, and so on. So the Liberty on the Rocks. So what is this conference about? What is it going to be focused on? I'm very excited to be part of this, because this is something that I think my ideology, what I've kind of decided makes sense to me over the time of doing this. I've never really chosen to pick like names or like titles or I am this or identify as that, whether libertarian or something else. But I've kind of come to realize that this is most clearly where it makes sense to me. My point in saying that is this is all this is new to me in a lot of ways as well. And so I'm really honored to be a part of this. So go ahead and let everybody know what this is and why it's important.
Sure. I'd like to take like a step back just for a second and kind of set the table. And that, in my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed, what I'm really doing is I'm making the case that government was never intended to protect life, liberty, and property. It's best thought of as kind of a technique for robbing and controlling populations. And you can never really have a legitimate government. It's impossible to have a legitimate moral government, because it's impossible for, you can't delegate a right that you don't have yourself to a representative to represent you doing something you don't have the ability to do yourself. You can't be bound by a social contract that you never signed. My fiance and I can't vote to rob Ryan because there's two of us and one of you. It doesn't matter if there's three of us or 330 million of us. There's no magical additional person that makes something immoral and illogical now moral and logical just because the mob wants to go along with it. And so it's really been the biggest scam in history. And a lot of the feedback that I would get from the book is, wow, Etienne, you do a great job of explaining how, what I call intergenerational organized crime. It's the banks, kind of the banks on the top. They create money out of thin air using a technique called fractional reserve banking. And they've been buying up the media and the kind of the Fortune 500 companies, cartelizing them with this money that they're stealing the value out of everybody else's money. So like that's kind of it in a nutshell of like what we're up against. And people go, you do a great job of explaining that, but what are we going to do? We got to have government. Who's going to build the roads? And so,
always that question.
I've got a new book coming out called Voluntaryism how the only ism fair for everyone leads to harmony, prosperity, and good karma for all. And
Mm-hmm.
by the only ism that is fair for everybody, if you really think about it, all the other political isms, whether it's socialism or communism or constitutional republicanism, all of those isms have a ruling class that has rights that you don't have and gets to, steal from the people that earn and save and redistribute it as they see fit. They get to arrest people for victimless crimes. They have, permissions that you don't. The intelligence agencies have little get out of jail free cards that they can flash on the side of a crime that trumps every other law enforcement and say national security and hide and obfuscate, whatever crimes that they're involved in. And so voluntarism is really the only political ism that's fair for everybody. Nobody gets the ring of power because there is no ring of power. Now, for those in your audience that aren't familiar with voluntarism, it's really the idea that all relationships should be voluntary. Nobody has rights that other people don't. Nobody has an exemption from morality, especially the government. And so when you start with your political philosophy on the moral high ground of non-aggression principle, of the golden rule, of the fact that nobody has exemptions for morality, then you can't really have government. Now, luckily for humanity, one of the biggest secrets kept, from the population is that the world is this self-organizing system. It produces spontaneous order, and everything that the government does would be done better, faster, and cheaper by the free market, by mutual aid societies, by nonprofits, by co-ops, by insurance companies, by armed protective service providers like Detroit Threat Management, that is doing a better job of protecting people in Detroit than the monopoly police, by arbitration providers, and by genuine charities. And some of this is common sense. We just saw it in Hurricane Helene, where the Cajun Navy and private helicopter owners were doing a better job of saving people after the hurricane than FEMA with its multi-billion-dollar budget. And so what we're saying is, hey, if we gave people back all of the money that they're being, robbed and stolen of, and we were to quit giving this organized crime banking system the ability to create money out of thin air, even though it's inflationary and even though it's stealing the value out of everybody else's money, then society would be a lot wealthier. There would be more economic activity for everybody. Wages would be going up. The value of your dollar would buy more and more and more every year as productivity improvements and innovations reduce the costs of either manufacturing or distributing the luxuries and necessities of life. And so everyone would be better off. It doesn't mean that there would be utopia. There's still going to be poverty. There's still going to be, the bad things, but it's going to be better for everybody else. And that's the idea that you're never, ever going to hear on the mainstream media. So we're having this conference in Sedona where we're bringing the, world experts in, economics and political philosophy and legal theory, et cetera, to be able to explain just how you can have everything that you want with more freedom and more choices than you have right now with this monopoly government that I believe is illegitimate and essentially a way of robbing society.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, let's go and start with that, since, the idea that it's such a difficult thing in most contexts, and still for most people, I would argue, to kind of wrap their mind around how this would take place or how this even makes sense. And that's why I laughed about that. It's the common joke about, who's going to build the roads. And it's the same argument that why I think that's actually an important starting point for most people is once you can get past that barrier of recognizing that it's still the same people, that the government overarching dominating hand pointing in directions doesn't change the fact that we're still the ones that would do it. And I do think that kind of opens people's minds, but it's always kind of that block to thinking that we need them to organize and direct and to maintain. And some people actually would still hold to that and say that, well, what happens without that? But we'll come to that in a second. So the conference, again, I just want to make sure people see that at the gate, because it's something I think is important for the growing understanding of what's going on in the conversation today, and whatever you want to call them, the normies or the average people that don't usually ask these questions. But so you mentioned, I wanted to ask you on a quick side note about voluntarism, because this is something that I was looking at. So there's different spellings of that, and there's one with a Y, there's one without it, and then there's one that's just like volunteerism. Is there any reason those are different? Or because I know like one of them just simply means like volunteering and having that as like a mindset, but is there a difference between, say, voluntarism and voluntarism, or are they just a different term used for the same thing?
I think it's different horses for different courses. Sometimes you might use volunteerism if you're talking about volunteering, but the political philosophy voluntarism generally has a Y and an ISM, and that's kind of the core function that has this idea that that all relationships must be voluntary, but also is kind of subsumed with the idea that that the world is this self-organizing system, and that the free market would provide all of the, if you really think about what government does, is it provide, mostly of what it does is provide services, whether that service is delivering the mail, or whether that service is running a train system, or whether that service is air traffic control, or whether that service is protecting the environment. And all of these things not just could be done by the free market, but actually are being done.
Right.
And so a little bit of what we're doing at the conference is we're highlighting and emphasizing that there are all of these examples of voluntarism doing a better job of the things people want government to do right now, right this very second, than are being done by government.
And to your point, like you said before, even in that same dynamic, those are still average people that would be able to do those jobs without the government kind of dictating the direction. So it's still kind of the same point. But so in regards
the people that are built, the government isn't building the roads. The government is hiring people to build the roads. And so you could eliminate the middleman, and you would still have high quality roads. There's no reason why the government has to do these things, other than the government taught you that they had to do these things in their mandatory government school that they made you attend, so they could teach you that they're indispensable.
Right. With their Prussian system and the lining up and the raising your hands. I mean, you do a great job explaining that. It's when you really look at it that way, it's almost eerie. Like I've had that conversation kind of casually before about like the Pledge of Allegiance. And you bring it up in like, isn't that weird? And people almost like aghast that you would say that, but then they think about it and they're like, yeah, that is pretty weird. Like we stand up and pledge, it's funny.
Well, Ryan, I don't want to give the book away or anything like that, but the secret is that they're using unethically manipulative techniques that they're stone cold cult indoctrination techniques. They're indoctrinating the belief in government into the population as a religion. Now, they're not calling it a religion, but they're using the same playbook of unethically manipulative techniques. They're going to force you to, the flag is the artificially indoctrinated holy symbol. They're going to put you into the church school where the teacher, the priest, is going to teach you about the common prayer of the Pledge of Allegiance. They're going to teach you about the hymns of the national anthem and the Star Spangled Banner. And they're going to take you to Mecca, Washington, D.C., generally in middle school. Yeah. And they're going to take you into the cathedral of the Capitol that looks like the Vatican for a reason, where everything is oversized, so you feel small and insignificant. And they're going to take you into the temples, and they're going to show you the deities of Lincoln and Jefferson, and it's going to be very hushed, and it's going to be very reverent. And then the media is going to come along, and they're going to run some more unethically manipulative techniques where they're going to product place the flag at moments of high positive emotion. They're going to put the flag on NBA backboards, so you subconsciously associate the exhilaration of the goal with the flag. They're going to put them on NFL helmets. They're going to do flag worship events at the sporting events so that you associate. It's a technique called anchoring. They're going to weave the flag into moments of high positive emotion in popular movies and in television shows, so that when the movie comes to the emotional apex, Rocky defeating his opponent and wrapping himself in the American flag,
Right.
you're going to subconsciously begin to associate that flag with these good things, because the government has been tricking you. They've been running game on the population. And so what I do in the book is I break it all down so people can understand how the magician is pulling the trick. Because, you know, I was a Cub Scout, I was a Boy Scout. They had me hook, line, and sinker until somebody explained it to me. And then when I understood that, hey, wait, they're running these unethically manipulative, you know, cult indoctrination techniques on the population with the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Explorers, the JROTC, the ROTC, the Marine Corps running young Marines and school programs, and literally the Marines run high schools where the entire curriculum is the Marine Corps. And so once you understand that they're doing this, then you're like, I'm out. Like, I'm not falling for that. Now I understand. Like, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and nobody likes to be a chump.
Yeah, right. I mean, I personal experience, I think when I was in high school, not like necessarily running the school, but I think we had a Marine Corps Army that would come, I mean, almost every month and do their tests in the middle of the square. And, you know, it's very, very much in your face. Before I move past the titles or the names in general, I wanted to ask you for for people to understand in general, myself included. So what would you see as the difference or the overlap between voluntarism, libertarianism, agorism, anarchy, and are they all just kind of in the similar ballpark? How do you look at it?
So I'd put libertarianism as the big umbrella term. And under libertarianism, which is kind of a big umbrella, you've got, you know, people that are minarchists. They believe in having a very minimal government that only protects life, liberty, and property. And so they think that the government should rob people at gunpoint to provide courts and national defense and things of that nature. Okay. But the government shouldn't do all these other things. And so therefore, you know, great deal of personal and economic freedom, but they do believe in having a government or a constitution or something like that. But under that umbrella term also falls, you know, libertarians that may or may not believe in having a government, and voluntarists, anarcho-capitalists, anarchists, peaceful anarchists. And all anarchy means is no rulers. It doesn't mean no rules. And one of the other things I break down in Government, the Biggest Scam in History, is how the dictionary has actually been changed over time to change the word for no rulers to mean chaos and dystopia. Because the rulers don't want the population to know there's an option on the menu called no rulers. Because if it was between rulers and no rulers, people would probably choose no rulers. So they've used their media system and control of the dictionary to change the word over time. And you can see the 1827 definition from the Webster's Dictionary, and you can compare it to the modern version from the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary to understand what I'm talking about, how it's been changed to be chaos and dystopia. And then I break down who owns the dictionary, and it's the Safford banking family owns both the encyclopedia and the dictionary. So the bankers at top that make up money out of thin air are buying the encyclopedia and the dictionary. And the guy that sits on the editorial review board for Encyclopedia Britannica and Merriam-Webster's Dictionary is a past president of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Of course.
And so they're controlling the information that society receives, whether it's editing the dictionary or monopolizing the media so that you only get, you know, to see certain information, censoring content creators like us algorithmically on the DARPA internet. And that control of perception, that really is the most important, most powerful weapon that this organized crime system has. And that's why most people have never, ever, ever, in many cases, heard the alternative that you don't really need government. They've never, you know, heard that, oh, there's well-known, respected, you know, economists and political philosophers and academics and professors that have already figured out how you could have everything the government does without the government, with people being wealthier and with a lot less strife in society. Because you wouldn't have to be fighting over the school board as one example, like there wouldn't be this, this fight to who controls the school board to, to impose your worldview on that, whether that be critical race theory or transgender studies or whatever it is, because you would just buy whatever education that you wanted for your kids, and you'd have more than enough, money to do that if the government wasn't stealing 50% of your income. And then there wouldn't have to be a fight over the school board, because you could send your kid to Montessori school, to a Waldorf school. You could homeschool your kid. You'd have all of these different options where you can get exactly what you want. You don't have to, fight politically to do so. So there'd be more harmony as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sounds like chaos, doesn't it? It's always so insulting. I make this point often where I simply say that anarchism is the only ideology that has no room for the rule. And obviously you wonder why they don't want to talk about it. It's such an important point to make about the, other direction that we could be going. And this is why let's bring this into one of the earlier points I wanted to get into, is that I genuinely think that right now more than ever, and I want your thoughts on maybe why this is, that I see more people, whether they're at least open to hearing this idea out, right? Like, and maybe you tell me if you see anything different, but I'm seeing more people interested in the two-party illusion, more people interested in the idea that maybe voting is not what it appears to be, or that our governments are fraudulent, or to the core of the point that government shouldn't exist at all. And never before have I seen this much interest or this much aggressive pushback from what I think is sort of a dying power structure because of that. So is that what you're seeing? And if so, why is that happening in your mind, in your opinion?
I'm seeing the exact same thing. I'm seeing more and more people being open to it. And I think that the reason is that the internet and the information age has made the corruption so much more visible to the average person, to where, whether or not you believe that we need to have a government, like you may think that, if we could just get our people in power, then they'd fix everything. But most people, even if they hold that worldview of minarchism or constitutional republicanism, almost everybody agrees that the government that we have in Washington, D.C. is being run as a criminal enterprise and is stealing money out the back door in the form of weapon systems that we don't need to fight wars, based on lies and manufactured intelligence. It's bank bailouts, it's mandatory vaccines for the pharmaceutical companies, it's mandatory subsidies for the ethanol industry. It's, I can just go on and on and on.
Funding genocide in real time. Yeah,
funding genocide in Gaza, funding things that people don't want.
Yeah.
And so now, they used to have kind of like an iron grip over the way that information moved through society. But really the internet in some ways, is this classic double-edged sword for them, where in some ways it's helping them censor more information. But at the same time, the intelligentsia, the intelligent people that just, that understand and are paying attention to what's going on, they're figuring out who robbed the bank, and they're getting saddled up. There's, the posse is kind of starting to form loosely, and people are saying, hey man, this is organized crime. They're stealing my money, and they're getting ticked.
Right.
And to a degree, it's out in the open in a way that has never, ever been before.
Which makes me really happy to see. And I think a lot of things are in that kind of realm right now. And I mean, really just at a larger kind of higher elevation view, I see whether it's the COVID-19 illusion or any number of agendas in between, or what's going on in foreign policy, it's just sort of falling apart in front of us, which is, there's obviously downsides. People are being hurt. There's chaos in some ways, but I think it's a positive change, And so in the context of the voting and two-party illusion dynamic, or even just like in the context of the upcoming selection, or however you view that, do you think, like I see this Republican pushback the same way I did, and again, to be clear, my audience knows my opinion I see that as the team sport politics, Republicans, Democrats, then there's the conservative and liberals that are maybe leaning towards one side or the other, but I see more of them are the ones that are more and more becoming open to this, which is why I see the team sport politics sort of just doubling down in its intensity. But I see that from the Republican side right now, like I did during COVID-19, as they really, push back in a way that they're, like, or rather the reverse, where Democrats were more so calling this out. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused on the agenda. So that the Republicans are highlighting the problem around this, but right now we have them ultimately beginning to see these problems, but they're getting kind of co-opted by what I see as this growing technocracy, this growing effort. Like, so how do you see that playing into this? Is that just the usual dynamic of politics, or do you think this is sort of like I was saying, this kind of dying reaction from something trying to, last gasp, trying to push us back into the system? And I guess one last point is, where do you kind of see that going afterward, the election dynamic, just before we get into everything else?
I see more and more people abandoning the fake left-right paradigm and not being, my example earlier was the magician can only fool you until you understand how he's doing the trick. And once you understand that he's dividing and conquering the population by essentially shunting them into the two largest, demographic groups that could be made to oppose each other, essentially collectivists and freedom, like most Republicans, they're for pro freedom, they're for free markets, they're for good things. But at the top, the leadership of the Republican Party has been co-opted, and they're not able to produce any policies that lead to real freedom. And they're, to the contrary, they're they're essentially the exact same policies as the Democrats on the issues that matter to the organized crime banking system. And so the Republicans and Democrats, they're lockstep in favor of fractional reserve banking. They're lockstep in favor of trillions of dollars handed to private banks and private companies through the TARP and the TALF and the bailouts of Wall Street. They were lockstep, for the COVID. They were lockstep for forcing this untested, quote unquote, vaccine on the population. And they're just arguing over kind of football issues of gay marriage or abortion that are important, but they're not as important as the real issues that would really free us and give us more disposable income and limit government and things like that.
And I also see the overlap, like with my point I've made around like the Save ID, or rather the Save Act, and the kind of Trojan horse for digital ID, is I see that's why, that I was saying before, and clumsily saying, is I think that the Republican Party, rather specifically conservatives, are uncomfortable with this, whether it's Trump's blind support for Israel or the idea that they, like you said, they really, that's why they sort of try to pacify them more than anybody during the COVID-19 conversation, is they are the constitutionalists, they are the ones with, gun owning militia, like that's more so that party in the larger context. And right now, I think they're starting to recognize that they recognize this opening, but that's why I think the Republican Party is definitely trying to kind of wrap them in using illusory legislation or things that they present as we're fighting for freedom, but right under the surface, it's in fact doing the exact opposite. But I'm that's why I kind of think more people are starting to wake up from this, which is definitely a positive thing. Do you think the current system as it is failing? Or is this some kind of is there something else driving these actions? Because I kind of read it as sort of that there is a desperation behind this, but I wanted your feeling on it. Why do you think this is so happening? And do you think this sort of like World Economic Forum technocratic push is kind of like a last effort to get past that to what's no longer a problem anymore for the power structure?
So it's failing at the same time that it's succeeding. And so, and I think it will continue to succeed until it ultimately fails. And that ultimate failure, I believe, is that this knowledge that government has been a trick. It's always illegitimate. It's always immoral. We don't really need it. I have a feeling that idea is going to go viral globally. Yeah. And I think you can only fool people until they understand the trick, and then they're kind of out. And so I just don't think that you can hide that in the information age. And so I think that idea has been the proverbial, beach ball underwater that they've been trying to hold, to kind of, keep people away from peaceful anarchy, keep people away from, exploring the ideas of a stateless society. But as more and more people engage with that, I call it the one-way revolution. It's only going in one direction. Like, so once you realize that government has been a trick and it's illegitimate and it's a dumb idea and it doesn't really work, it looks good on paper, but like once you kind of, you get that idea, you're out. And you're not going to fall for the fake left-right paradigm. You're not going to vote for Trump or Kamala or Jill Stein or anybody else, you're out. You're now not in their crooked, rigged poker game anymore. And so that's the one-way revolution that I see happening everywhere as more and more and more people realize the basics of the scam and remove themselves from playing in the rigged poker game.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I kind of feel like it's happening, like maybe not viral, but I think that's kind of what we're sensing is there is this kind of momentum growing. And I think that is, my opinion would be that the whole technocratic drive is, like today we're at a point where this long sought agenda is now technologically possible. And I think that this effort is to sort of get past a point where maybe they just pull the mask off and say, yes, we're exactly what you thought, but too late now, you can't do anything about it. That's kind of where I feel like it's going. And maybe just as an effort because people are waking up to it. But, one thing before we get into like the, future idea of what would we do and how do you transition is I'm in an interesting place where I argue, my mindset is very much in this idea. I think government is the problem. I don't think government has a right to exist. I think we can build a world where that is the reality. But at the same time, I argue from within this dynamic where I know that like there are people that still want to vote. And I always start with that point. I don't think you should vote. I don't think it matters. But if you're going to, and then get into another point where I talk about where, like, for example, the Constitution. I do believe in the Constitution insofar that this system exists, if that makes sense. Like I do, I would argue that from the origin point that none of that should have to be there in the conversation of, from a government perspective. But with the current system, if we're forced to exist in it, I would argue that that is a positive thing, I guess. Does that make sense to you? Or is that something that wouldn't really, make sense to go ahead? Does that make sense?
Well, it does. I mean, you're right that we need to have basic human rights codified. And when like when most people say the Constitution, what I've noticed is they're talking about the Bill of Rights. And there needs to be some kind of codification that says, hey, government doesn't have the ability to control free speech, even though they do. They don't have the ability to keep you from, being armed, even though they do. They don't have the ability, so it's a good idea, but the government ignores it. You should be safe and you should be safe and secure from having your papers and your personal effects searched by the government at any time, but it doesn't work. And so it's a great idea, but it just didn't work. And then there's some point that I'm dumbfounded and amazed that most constitutional, Republicans don't realize that it doesn't work at all. It hasn't been able, the Constitution has not been able to limit government at all. And the Constitution has not even been able to guarantee even the most basic of human rights. And so, if you think that we have a Second Amendment, you go to Maryland where they've had, thousands of red flag gun confiscations done by the police. The police are going away for it, but it says right there that you've got a Second Amendment, but they're going to take your guns in Maryland through a red flag law because your neighbor found out you had guns and told them about it. And it's it's that simple. And so the Constitution, it doesn't work. And so at some point you got to go, okay, if that doesn't work, then what does work? And luckily, real freedom, and it's amazing. Like real freedom really delivers the goods. If you just got government out of the way, society would flourish. It wouldn't be, we're not claiming it's utopia. That's communism. Like communism's, we just got to steal everything. We'll create utopia. We're not saying that, you're going to have utopia. We're saying it's going to be a lot better for the average person. There's going to be a lot more wealth in society, and the fact that there is more wine, cheese, and bread on the table means that the poor, the needy, the disadvantaged, there's more than enough surplus for them when society isn't having the product of their labor stolen from them and siphoned, out the back door in Washington, D.C. to the worst, scummiest people imaginable.
Yeah. And as I always simply put it, that, their government always pretends to remove danger from your life. And the reality is it doesn't, right? There's danger will always be existent. And like you're saying, in that system we just described, of course, there will be hardship. There will be danger. That's life. Government simply adds another form of danger on top of everything else that's going on. But so I would say that, I think that the reason I asked that question is because it's like I'm trying to reach the average people in a way that sort of like can get them on this path, you know.
Mhm.
But at the same time, maybe that's counterintuitive, you know. So it's like these are the thoughts that are going through my mind as I'm understanding more of the possible directions in all of this, you know. So
Yeah.
let's talk about first and foremost with the conversation we're having. So I asked a couple people, you know, what would be the question that would come to your mind? People that I know have really no understanding about this dynamic. And one of the questions is right now is in your mind, is there a place in the world right now that best comes closest to what you envision? Obviously, there's nothing I think that is what we're talking about, but is there a place in the world you would say is the closest in that direction right now?
So one of the things that I both covered in Government, the Biggest Scam in History, and I'm covering in the new book, Voluntaryism, is these libertarian intentional communities and communities that have gotten rid of government. And so I'll give you just a couple of examples. On the island of Roritan, off the coast of Honduras, is a libertarian intentional community called Prospera that went and leveraged a law that the Honduran government had passed to create special economic zones. And they negotiated sovereignty with the government of Honduras, and they have started, they're over 1,000, kind of acres, and they essentially have the lowest taxation. They've got a negotiated sovereignty. So besides criminal laws, which do apply to the government of Honduras, but like a lot of the business rules and regulations and they don't apply in the special economic zone. And so they have the lowest tax rate and the lowest regulatory burden of almost any quote unquote government. It is a government, but it is the tiniest little fraction of a government that you can imagine. And it is succeeding dramatically to the point of where all of the commie governments around it in Cuba and Venezuela and now since the special economic zone law was passed in Honduras, a more commie socialist government has come in, and so now they're openly talking about, oh, we don't want this here. Look, they're succeeding. They're literally making us look horrible because they pay better wages than the average wage in Honduras. They have more economic freedom. They have better their public safety net is portable. They can take, it goes with them. Their retirement goes with them. It's not the government's to be able to dole out. And so they're doing all of these things that make the governments look bad. So the government wants to wipe them out. That's one example. Another example that I would give is the town of Sharon in Mexico, which kicked out both the federal government of Mexico and the cartels over a decade ago, and is doing just fine. They don't have the federales don't come around, and the cartel doesn't come around, and they're self-governing themselves and have been doing it for over a decade, and they're doing just fine. That's another example. And the final example I'd give is the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is concentrating libertarians and voluntarists and peaceful anarchists and minarchists and freedom lovers from around the world into New Hampshire. There's over 10,000 that are on the ground right now. They've got 25 plus elected members of the House. They've got a voting bloc with other freedom-oriented Republicans. It's over 100 pro-freedom bloc in the legislature right now. They're rolling back laws. They're empowering freedom in a way that isn't being done kind of anywhere else. And so they consequently, New Hampshire doesn't have a state income tax. They don't have a state sales tax. They've got one of the tiniest quote unquote safety nets there, but the people are flourishing. They have the least amount of poverty. They're in the bottom 5 of all 50 states. They've got literally almost the least amount of poverty. They were number 1 in having the least amount of children living in poverty. And so they've got tremendous economic growth. They've got tremendous economy. They've got one of the highest average incomes in all of the different states with the lowest tax and regulatory burden. So they're kind of proving something that we know, that the more economic and personal freedom you have, the more economic prosperity that you have. And so there's, think tanks, Fraser Institute in Canada, Cato here in the United States. They rank both the states and the countries based on the amount of personal freedom they have and economic freedom they have. And across the board, what we know is the more freedom that you have, the better that you do economically and the less, disharmony that you have among the population. So voluntarists just want to maximize that. And like, okay, if we already know that is a guaranteed dynamic that's going on, then let's have maximum economic freedom and maximum personal freedom, and you'll see society flourish.
Yeah, I agree. Now, interestingly enough, I agree with the latter two, but I covered this, and we should even talk more on this. Maybe we can talk more in the conference, because this will be a good question to bring up in maybe the final panel kind of discussion. But I looked deeper into the Prospera conversation. Now, it's actually its owner that funded by Peter Thiel. And as I dive into this deeper, it becomes interesting to find out. This is the article I did on it. It's called The Technocratic Regime Change. Under the guise of freedom, technocrats are slowly taking control. And it's a larger conversation. But what worried me about specifically Honduras, and this is not a pro-con discussion of the other governments around it, but specifically that what they're doing to me begins to seem more and more like an illusion. Like, okay, what I'm talking about around the sort of like fake, co-option of whether like Bitcoin or the libertarian movement of like the Republican side of this. I feel like this is part of that. And I could definitely be wrong. But what I'm worried about is that this is ultimately trying to tap into what we're talking about and create this in a way that is more of a technocratic takeover. And what I'm noticing is what's going on in the local area is actually almost at the expense of the Honduran people outside of this area. And there are actually encroaching on a place called Crawfish Rock, where they're claiming that they have the permission to do it. And the way it got set up was actually post an illegal coup from the US government that Peter Thiel and these companies took advantage of. And even if it ends up being a positive thing, it's interesting to see how this is playing out in a illegal regime change. They actually remove people on the court to be able to get the law passed. Then they revoke the law. Now they don't care. It's an interesting way it's happening. So I actually hope that I'm wrong, and I'd like to believe that this goes in the direction of essentially fulfilling what we're talking about. But I worry that there's a play happening here, and maybe give me your thoughts on that in general, kind of like the larger Republican, Trump, Elon Musk, Thiel kind of direction and technocracy and all that, or just this point. And do you see that in this, or do you see that happening in general in a large way? I think it's an interesting conversation.
So I don't know the extent that Thiel has his hooks into Prospera, other than being an investor. I know
primary backer is all I know.
Yeah. I don't even know if it's the primary backer, but I can find out. I can find that out, and we can reconvene on that.
We should. It's a good
what I will say is that one of the things that we were very prescient about is in my book, Government: The Biggest Scam in History, Exposed. There's only one, which was the 5th edition, was released in early 2022 or 2023. And in that, 2020, 3. And in that 5th edition, there was only one politician whose name appeared 3 times, and that was J.D. Vance. And we used him as an example of a CIA-connected politician, because Peter Thiel is a CIA contractor that funded J.D. Vance's campaign to the tune of $15 million, the largest single donation to a Senate campaign ever. But J.D. Vance, we also used him as an example of a CIA-controlled media piece, because there's dozens and dozens of people within the media, out of like the 200-ish that get to talk about news and current events on the media. He was a CNN correspondent. So because he has been funded by other CIA contractors, his venture capital firm is funded by CIA contractors Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos. They've got multi-billion-dollar agreements with the CIA for cloud computing and web services.
It's just so ridiculous that people. Sorry, go ahead.
it is so ridiculous. And Eric Schmidt. And
God.
so Eric Schmidt is an investor into his thing, and in CIA, like we have, one of the documents that we have on our flash drive of Freedom the Liberator is how the CIA created Google, which breaks down the Highland Forum and the programs that Google came out of, and all of its connections to the military industrial complex through the Highland Forum and through early grants that they got from DARPA for Google Technologies, the handing of keyhole satellite data, which created Google Maps, which made Google so indispensable to many people. And so you've got CIA contractors funding this guy JD Vance. And then the final example of JD Vance is we used him as a textbook example of what we called a created legend, which is where the CIA will give people undeserved accolades, like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll write a best-selling book for you. We'll make you a best-selling author. We'll have Ron Howard and Netflix come around and make a movie out of your best-selling book right before your Senate campaign, to get you so we can install you in office so that we can make you the vice president, ultimately make you the president. And so Barack Obama, we break down his connections to the CIA, and first job out of college is working for a known CIA front company called Business International Corporation, and other connections to the CIA. But the CIA is now installing these politicians in the country. And I think Peter Thiel is one of those conduits that they're saying, okay, yeah, Peter, we'll give you billions and billions of dollars for Palantir and for these companies, but you're going to serve as some of that money is going to serve as you're going to fund these people we tell you to fund, and we're going to you're going to fund these causes and these organizations and these groups or whatever it is. And so I think that is the dynamic that we've seen with JD Vance. And so then we list him. He's the only politician appears 3 times. We list him literally as the example of CIA installed politicians, CIA installed media, and created legends. And lo and behold, he's made vice president of the United States.
How funny is that?
He's like a leading candidate. He's the leading candidate to be vice president of the United States and probably president in the next election cycle. And so, like, we called it like a Babe Ruth homer.
Yeah, absolutely did, man. And that's impressive. Cause I mean, really, to see that happen and realistically, nobody, I mean, well, I'm sure some people, but most people would not have predicted that person would become vice president with so little background. So it's interesting, And so this is what I was kind of laughing out there. I said, just burst out laughing. How it's just such a comical, cartoonish, those are the outsiders. That's what jumped into my head. Like these are the independent outsiders trying to change the system or fight the deep state. They represent a better example of the deep state than anything I see pointing to today. It's incredible to me. And just for the record, obviously, I think Kamala Harris and Walz are all the same thing. I just find them to be so embarrassingly secondary. Like my honesty, since it comes up, and I've said this on the show many times, I get the sense that they're almost playing the role of the clownish underdog. Like, it just, that even people that want to support her are going to go, well, at least Trump's saying he wants to fight for free speech. Like they're driving people in that direction. It's a fascinating thing. But we should come back to that larger conversation. The bigger point of the possibility of whether it's technocracy or any number of authoritarians sort of utilizing the idea, like they do with anything for that matter. A growing momentum gets co-opted, right? And I'm worried that might be part of what we're seeing with this stuff, And at the very least, we should all be on guard for that exact point, I
agree.
I'd like to go into another question about, like, and this was one of the ones somebody else asked me, and I'm sure you get this all the time. And so let's jump to a world where this has effectively happened, right? So now we're in a place where exactly what you would envision is now in effect. So the question becomes, what happens then when somebody goes rogue or a group or something happens and all of a sudden your society is challenged by a violent group or somebody who doesn't want to play their part, so I'm sure you got plenty of answers for that. So how would that go in that context in a world that this is in effect?
So in a world where you don't have the monopoly police, everybody wants to be safe and secure in their home. Everybody wants to be safe and secure at their businesses. Businesses need to be able to do business. People need to be comfortable, going to their home at night. And so there is a market for armed protective services. of which the government has installed itself as the monopoly provider and does an absolute horrible job. And it's kind of funny because right now I'm back in my second hometown, Memphis, Tennessee, right now,
Nice.
and it's so bad that every single shopping center, every single business has to go out and hire private security in addition to the free armed protective services that they're getting from the government. And so people are already paying, they're like having to pay twice because they're not getting the armed protective services that they're promised by the government. Does such a crappy job that they have to, hire, additional armed protective services. And so, but the difference between the monopoly version and the private version is, number one, there's the market competition. So now you've got companies like ADT and Brinks and West Tech that are already providing armed protective services today, competing for your dollar, which number one means they're probably going to do a better job as Brinks, who does a better job of protecting, the neighborhoods in the city, who does a better job of getting restitution instead of retribution. The government system is all about retribution. In a private system, I don't really care about retribution. I want to get my television back. I want to get my money back. I want you to produce restitution instead of retribution. And I have the ability to protect my own life, liberty, and property. So I can delegate that to an armed protective services company to exercise on my behalf. But I don't have the ability of telling my neighbor that he can't have a poker game. I don't have the ability of telling my neighbor he can't smoke a plant. So I can't have my armed protective service guy go over and do something that I don't have the right to do today. Whereas the monopoly, government, they'll throw you in jail for having a poker game. They'll throw you in jail for smoking a plant. They'll throw like they're out there using violence on peaceful people in ways that prove that they're tyrannical and immoral. And so you're not going to get that in a private system, as just a couple of examples of why it would be better. But most people have never really thought about it because it's not going to be on the test, right?
Right.
At the government school. And so, what we're trying to do with Liberty on the Rocks is, well, a lot of people have thought about it. Some of the world's leading legal scholars and economists, and we're going to, let you see and these people that are going to talk to you about how we're going to build the roads, how we're going to, deliver the mail without the government. By the way, Canada privatized air traffic control over a decade ago, and planes aren't dropping out of the sky in Canada. One of the examples I've been using a lot is there's actually a place in Maine called the North Maine Woods. It's 3.5 million acres of privately protected forest. It's twice the size of Massachusetts. It's all privately owned, and all the owners, have thrown in. Mostly it's timber companies, but there's private landowners and nonprofits that are interested in conservation and things like that. And it has all of the amenities that you'd expect from a national park. You can go hiking there. You can go hunting. You can go four-wheeling. You can go do everything you can do in a national park, but it's all private. And so a lot of people, they're going to be shocked. You mean there's a privately protected park twice the size of Massachusetts? How did I not know about this? Right. And these are the things you're going to find out about at Liberty on the Rocks.
Outstanding. Well, so back to the point in regard to the enforcement. So what's interesting is the answer is essentially that you, and obviously the unspoken obvious point is you can defend yourself, right? You can.
That doesn't go away.
Yeah, but so in this case, you could hire somebody. So as like an entity, so you run a company, you can hire somebody to defend that. And so the question then, I guess the extension would be, I mean, realistically, you could then make your force attack somebody or do something. And so I'm trying to get to the point of how that like.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, so now let's say one of these companies wants to go rogue. Okay, so number one, not a lot of business owners that have successful companies want to risk that by, going and picking, like now openly committing evil and robbing other people. Number one. So you're really not going to have a business owner that's probably going to do that. But let's say you do, he's gone insane, and he now, goes down to the, to the room where everybody gets ready and goes, hey, we're going to go and invade this other town or do whatever it is. Well, a lot of people aren't going to go along with it. Number one, because the people that work there, they're like, I didn't really sign up for that. Number two, all of his customers are going to quit, right? Hey, wait a minute, dude. I'm paying you to protect me, not go and rob other people or doing whatever it is that the person wants to do. So the customers are going to quit. And then finally, if you go to try and attack somebody else that has, like, if ADT goes to attack, somebody that has service with Brinks, then they're going to have to face Brinks. Right. And so there's all of these kind of checks and balances that the market has that would prevent something like that from ever happening.
Well, and I think the obvious point there is that, like we said in the beginning, the danger and risk is not removed in any situation. But so there's always going to be somebody that might choose. I think the interesting point is, like you discuss about it kind of self-regulates where the other people involved wouldn't want that. Now, let's just say hypothetically, obviously somebody could do that and maybe even cause violence and maybe even take something that's not theirs. But I would argue that what you would describe is that the towns around them or the people would no longer want their services, and then people would ultimately be able to marshal and push back. And it's, I guess what we're saying is it's basically the same kind of dynamic that would happen today, ultimately with less, lack of freedom and government control over your life. And ultimately people would still, I think that's what makes the most sense. And I think what people get afraid of by that is sort of like this almost too much freedom, which is actually an interesting point in the conversation today. There's so many people out there. I don't mean that in a bad way. For me, that's what I would want, and most people should. But there's people, like statist-minded people, that get terrified of the idea that they have to be responsible for their choices, or that they have to take more responsibility, or that there would be more possibilities like that. And I think that is sort of the detriment to the propagandized mindset. Is some people are almost afraid. I think there's a portion of people that want to be ruled.
There is 100%.
About.
They want to be led. Yeah. And by the way, that there's there's a well understood, psychological phenomenon called evolutionary leadership theory. And it says that, that there's an innate human desire for a leader. And that this is, we grew up, we're tribal, human beings are tribal. And it was an advantage to having a strong leader. And so over time, it developed a kind of innate desire in the majority of the population. The difference is, if you are a leader, you don't necessarily need a leader. And so, but a lot of people, they aren't leaders. So they really, really want a leader. And so the organized crime system understands this behavioral psychology. And so they present the population with either a blue leader or a red leader. And so you get tricked into choosing government leader A or government leader B. People think, they're worried about in a world without government, how that warlords would take over. Well, warlords have already taken over. They just pretend to let you elect them. They're literally pretending that you elected them and that's the reason why they're in power. But they are warlords, and they will kill, assassinate whoever, gets in their way. But they don't do it a lot, because then everybody sees what's happening, and it becomes obvious that what's going on. But every once in a while they'll whack JFK, they'll whack one of their political puppets, because he's not going along with whatever they want to do, or what another faction in the power structure wants them to do.
Yeah, I get back to the earlier point. That's what I think is largely shaking people free from this kind of manipulation, is that it's on such full, obvious display. The average soccer mom out there that's never even thought about this stuff is seeing dead children on her feed. It's like that. It's hard for people to get past that. And I think, it's the kind of belligerence of believing you have this control that maybe more than you do, and that you're taking action that is, historically has been easy to get rid of or deny or just sidestep. It's not happening today. And I think that's all the things we've discussed today kind of all together. So let's end with a point that I think is important as well. That one thing I really like about your work is that you have a focus on one of the questions that's, I think right now more so than ever, clearly in everybody's minds. How do we begin the transition, right? How do we make the transition from where we are? And that's honestly one of the parts that I struggle with, because I would say I can see a path, but I think most people don't understand like who build the roads kind of questions, how to begin that point. I think there's so much propagandized, almost to the cult level mentality, that these people will fight to defend the illusion. So to the question, how do we begin that transition? How do we make the first step? And what do you think that would be?
The first step is getting together with acknowledged experts and having them explain to the population how that this could be done, and the illegitimacy and the criminality of government, which is what we're trying to do with Liberty on the Rocks. And so, one of the things that I like is I like to make it fun. And so, just to give everybody so that's the overall thing that we're trying to do, is we're trying to have some of the leading experts in law and economics come and begin to explain to the population, hey, you don't really need government. Assuage their fears and explain what a better world would look like, and the benefits of having this more peaceful way of organizing society. But we also want everybody to have a good time. And so on Saturday, November 2nd, we're going to be streaming this event live, but on Friday night, we're opening it up with a kind of the quintessential Sedona experience. We're going to have a group guided meditation around something called the biocharger, which amps up intention and supercharges group meditations.
Nice.
We're going to have a sound bath by Peter Sterling, who's a world-renowned harpist. And then we're going to have a party and a concert with Grant Elman. Grant Presence Elman is headlining, but also Derek Bros and Larkin Rose are going to be bringing their musical gifts as well. And then on Sunday, we're going to have a fun day, and we're going to take everybody out. We're going to do some yoga on the rocks. We're going to have a group hike. We're going to have a group lunch. We're going to have a barbecue that night. And really, we're going to begin, come on out, meet people, and understand that there is a liberty movement around you. The people are super cool. Everybody's having a good time. We try and make it fun to resist. And the more fun that we make it, that I think the more people that join us. And so that's what we try and do when we have these events.
I love it, man. I think it's a powerful thing. And, and I think this is what we need more of, and like to emulate this idea and make it about not just like, here's what you should learn and here's what you should think, but actually the community part of it, which is what I think, more obviously more than, 2 days of the community, one of the events. And I actually think this is more of the important side. Obviously all of this is very important. So I'm really glad you're doing this. I'll end with one more question, actually. And I guess to kind of extension of what we're saying is ultimately the average person out there that's never heard any of this before, right? This is the first time I've ever heard these ideas and are going, okay, I want to start doing this in my life. But, they have a job where they pay taxes and they vote, and everything else. What would be an easy beginning step for them in your mind to kind of begin their journey in this path?
Start paying cash. But like my number one thing is that, the number one thing that everybody can do is just pay in cash and keep cash alive, is to try and keep us from being herded into a central bank digital currency or a cashless world where they can turn off people's ability to buy and sell. It's to turn off the television. It's to get, to begin to educate yourself. Just move 5% of your entertainment into education.
Yeah.
It's to get organized in real life, start a freedom cell, start a meetup group, get together with with like-minded people, start a garden. Buying your own food, or like growing your own food, is like printing your own money. Start a community garden. Those are just like a small handful of like little bitty things that you can do that are going to benefit you innumerably, whether or not we're successful in the short term, the medium term, or the long term. All of those things are going to be good for you. Also, one more thing on paying in cash. You're first of all, you're starving the banks that are at the top of 1.5 to 2.5% on every transaction. At the same time that you're making that local, especially when you're doing business, locally, you're making that merchant an additional 1.5 to 2.5%, and you're allowing the merchants to keep that money off of the books. So maybe they can afford a guitar lesson for their son or daughter, or, they can, put their kid into a school outside of the government system. the more money that we can keep in the local economy, the better. And so these are some of my favorite things they can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great list to start. And I would add one point to also, as he highlighted before, immerse yourself in the community around those activities, right? Learn from the people around you and how they've grown and understand this. Because that's, I mean, again, the community is a very powerful part of this. So thank you for being here today and breaking this all down. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming event. And I will say here, make sure you don't miss the side event that we're doing as well, which is a kind of behind the scenes. So this will be streamed through TLAV, and I'll be interviewing the people before they go on stage, talking to the crowd. You'll probably see clips of this very interview and different things throughout the day. It'll be an all-day event. So I'm really looking forward to this and honored to be a part of it. Anything else you want to leave us with on the way out? You know, other upcoming events and just kind of words of wisdom on the way out?
I would say the website is sedona.artofliberty.org. And I've got a new book coming out. Like I said, Voluntaryism, How the Only Ism Fair for Everyone Leads to Harmony, Prosperity, and Good Karma for All. And so that's going to really, kind of break down the how you would do it in the same image and visualization rich format that I did with the book Government, the Biggest Scam in History.
Outstanding. Well, I highly recommend you all check it out. I do think that people are ready for this information, and it might just kind of open your mind to what you've always been thinking you needed, right? I think that's one of the problems is there's people out there that see all this, they recognize it's a problem, but then end up going, well, I'll vote for the lesser of evil. Well, guess what? There's other paths that can be taken. And I think that's one of the earliest things to kind of reach people with. So thank you, my friend, for being here. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
How do you create a successful liberty movement? How do you create a successful liberty community? So I want to welcome everybody to Liberty on the Rocks. For those of you in the audience unfamiliar with voluntarism, it's the idea that all relations between people must be voluntary.
You can decide for yourself if you're a fan of law and order. I am not. I'm a big fan of voluntary, peaceful order.
Our local government is executing World Economic Forum agendas through the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
If you're voting for or advocating or supporting government, then you are number one voting to rob your friends and neighbors who disagree. You're advocating violence as a solution to socioeconomic problems, and you're legitimizing the system that is enslaving you.
You know, I'm trying to make an impact nationally and internationally, but one of the things I do wherever I go is I want to make an impact locally. And so I got plugged in with a local liberty group, and I met a whole bunch of really, really amazing people that were already working towards liberty in Sedona.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Then we have a responsibility to do something about it.
They have to frame it in such a way so that the well-intentioned good people cheer for evil.
No one gets to use violence or extortion on anyone else. No one gets an exemption from morality, especially the government. And no one gets the ring of power because there isn't a ring of power.